You still see the screen, I guess, right, Chuck?
Yep, we're good. We're still on that whole front round.
So how's it going this morning, Chuck?
Good. We're involved in some of the challenges of actually writing a electrical safety plan as a collaborator with a company.
Oh, okay.
So kind of one of those COVID-inspired work from home type of projects that we engaged in. So we took a look at our custom approach to that, and the customer liked it. So we're working through the different sections of his plan that we developed in our methodology of writing that plan. So.
Oh, okay. So when do you think we'll get back to our normal?
You know, we had some interesting news here in the state of Wisconsin that our Supreme Court has struck down the stay-at-home order of the governor.
Wow.
So I guess if you look at that, there's some level, I guess, at the county or individual level where businesses that by administrative order have been closed now have the opportunity to reopen. I guess under the ruling of the day. So again, you know, health policy versus politics, and where we're going to go with all this, and when do we get back to some level of activity other than, you know, just staying in our respective homes and you know, not doing the things we used to do a month and a half ago. Yes.
Okay, nice. All right, let's get this started. So
right.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for watching our live stream this morning. And I'm sure you all are safe and healthy. I have Chuck Fox here on call this morning.
Good morning.
Chuck is a principal and owner of ASG Electric, Madison, Wisconsin-based company. And Chuck is also a certified electrical safety compliance professional from NFPA organization. Chuck and I got connected about a month ago through one of our inside sales specialists on a unique electrical safety application. So just on a background, Chuck attended one of my webinars in the past on the topic of absence of voltage and on Grace permanent electrical safety devices. And then Chuck was working on a project with a company called Torrance Casting. Torrance is a LaCrosse, Wisconsin-based family-owned foundry, which had a unique challenge of verifying the de-energized state, or in other words, complying to Article 120.5 in establishing a de-energized state for NFPA 70E. So Chuck and I, we started looking at the application from installation standpoint, risk mitigation, and we also suggested a few of our products, like our voltage test station and absence of voltage testing. So as part of that application, I asked Chuck if he is available to do an applications case study for some of our viewers and also other industry end users so they can benefit from this application, and also asked him to do kind of what really goes into when they select a product that fits that application, taking several factors into consideration. So Chuck graciously accepted my request, and here we are today. So with that, Chuck, why don't you give a quick introduction about yourself and what do you guys do at ASG Electric?
All right. Well, thanks for having me today. Appreciate it. ASG Electric is an electrical contractor where we do most of our work in the industrial and commercial segments. Our roots of the company is we actually started as an electrical testing practice where we acquired the TEGG Services franchise license in terms of what we did in terms of electrical testing and assessing electrical systems. Back in 2008, I was the sales and project manager for another electrical contractor in the Madison area, and their management decided to no longer continue or develop that practice. And it was, frankly, my job to be both the project manager and sales guy. So I was a guy that herded customers from the hi, how are you, to a complete health check of their electrical system at the time. And my wife, Tammy, and I decided that we would acquire the tools of the electrical testing practice from our former company and start ASG Electric back in the fall of 2008. Interesting enough, in the fall of 2008, the NFPA 70E standard was the launch of the 2009 version, and at that time, it was the very first standard of 70E that required arc flash device-specific labels. So at that time, when we saw that, we very quickly came to the conclusion that as you're inventorying the electrical system for the purpose of testing and inspection and health check, which is what we sold for all the years beforehand, the new door opened in terms of working with the 70E standard and arc flash and those types of things, building upon the building blocks we already had in place.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, that's really a long history of your existence in the electrical safety space and what you guys do. Really,
been working that standard since the 2009 and forward, where really the business of doing arc flash studies really came into focus.
Okay, so why don't you give our audience a quick overview of Torrance Casting and what they do? I know that you mentioned that they are a 6th-generation family-owned business, and then they've been 6th generation, correct? 160 years in existence. So
yeah,
just give a quick background on what these guys do.
So it's about 145 years or so. They were actually started in 1876, and the current president of the company, John Torrance, is now the 6th generation to do that. And first of all, you just can find that as an amazing accomplishment. But inside that essentially is what I'll call the core and company values of why it not only has grown, but also stayed a family business. And, as we look at how the company works and views and has the vision for its role within the community, its commitment to its employees and the safety, all of that really was some real foundations that allowed us to have some really deep discussions on the 70E standard, that why we wanted to learn and develop things related to the standard. Behind it was let's understand what the industry is asking us to do today in terms of the standard, and then let's go out and get it done because it's the right thing to do for our employees and for our company. And that's really the spirit of the joy of working with a company like Torrance through our history with them.
So how long have you been associated with Torrance, and what type of services you were hired to do for Torrance?
Yeah, we started our discussions probably about 3 years ago now, and as we first started with the discussion of qualified individuals and what are the safety protocols and practices that we want to wrap around that qualified individual, ultimately our first order of major business was performing the arc flash risk assessment. And of course, in our project methodology, we incorporate that electrical system inventory and the TEGG Services of condition of maintenance. Frankly, the 2015 standard is the one that really brought a lot of those core requirements and made them much more highly visible within the 70E standard in terms of condition of maintenance. Safety-related maintenance is now part of the 90.2, the scope or mission statement of the 70E standard. So as we practice our project methodologies today, data collection includes electrical system testing and assessment and a health check of the electrical system. And then we're ready to go do the arc flash study because we've collected all that data along the way. So data collection, the engineering analysis, and the incident energy calculations. And then our company offers a full suite of electrical safety training programs, and working with the company to assess and buy their personal protection equipment, getting the right gear in place on that. And then over the years, we've expanded that now to actually helping folks write their electrical safety plan. But our first piece back in 2017 and 18 was that arc flash risk assessment, and that gave us the awareness of the data that ultimately is what we're going to talk about today in terms of this particular application, this particular piece of equipment of their furnace, their critical furnace that they use to obviously create the molten metal that creates what they do as a foundry and the products that they kick out the door.
Yeah, before we go into the application specific, can you just explain what is Torrance Casting commitment towards worker safety? I'm sure that they're not simply installing these devices like our voltage test station or voltage indicators to just as a compliance requirement. I think companies like Torrance definitely have a higher bar or standard when it comes to safety and implementing safe work practices for their employees in enhancing their workplace safety. I think compliance is not the primary reason why these systems have been implemented or the decision to implement this. Can you just elaborate on that, please?
Well, Vinay, I absolutely agree with that. And for Torrance, it is more than just compliance. You look at that marvelous history of 145 plus years of a family-owned business now being transitioned from ultimately the sixth generation and potentially continuing. As we explore things on their website, they describe their commitment and concern for the community and being a good neighbor and a good employer within their geography and servicing their customers well. I'm sure they had opportunities probably to, I'll say, cash in and leave the business behind as that family tradition. But it is that family tradition weaved into those types of things that becomes the basis for why suggesting implementing these types of initiatives in terms of electrical safety makes sense. We can use the guidelines within the 70E standard that point and suggest these items. But then, like you say, are you required to do it, or you want to move forward to do these things because we can improve worker safety, create a more reliable and safer electrical system, and we're going to do that because it's the right thing to do for our employee group and overall versus OSHA telling us to do something.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So. I'm just showing on the screen the specific furnace cabinet, what we talked, right? So I'm just trying to get that picture on the screen so it's our customers and users can see that. Give me 1 second. There you go. Here it is. Can you explain the specifics of this furnace cabinet we discussed about for this application of absence of voltage, and also any unique challenges that you would like to even highlight as they relate to the absence of voltage testing with this type of applications?
So this is an image of the motor control cabinet that drives their furnace environment that melts the metals that makes the products that they do. So from a production asset standpoint, is one of their most critical assets on the production floor along the way. Unique to this environment is this particular furnace is pretty much directly connected to a...
Kind of lost you here, Chuck.
I'm sorry, Vinay? I think we might have lost Vinay here. So this is connected to a medium voltage transformer.
Chuck, are you there?
I am.
All right, probably I kind of cut off from my connection, I guess. So yeah, go ahead, please.
We got it from there. So I guess in review, this is one of the most critical assets for Torrance overall. It's unique because it literally, if we look at a one-line diagram, it goes from a medium voltage transformer right to this motor control cabinet, and it's operating at 575 volts in the process there. So when we did the arc flash calculation, given how close it is to medium voltage and the type of fusing, the calculated incident energy was 119 calories, which is, if we look at that 40 calorie threshold of typically that danger do not enter, we're at almost 3x that as the process. So as we did our data collections on these, and we have now all of the data that we have, our TEGG Services protocol gave us all of the pictures and images and details that we needed in order to work with Vinay and Grace Technologies in order to, frankly, help develop that solution. So our whole project approach brought us to the point of, now that we have this hazardous piece of equipment identified, we've done enough homework on it to be able to move forward with our understanding to develop a solution set for it.
Sure, and I'm going to show something here on the screen, what the internal guts would look like on this application. Yeah, can you just explain the line and load side of that, and what is that, the white things in between, those bus connections?
So if we open up the door to the cabinet, this is what we see, and we see a lot of very large busing in front of the cabinet, in the foreground of the cabinet there, and all of that busing is still on the line side of the disconnect for the rest of the cabinet here. In the middle, there's the white assemblies that sit between line and load. And although it's kind of hard to see in this particular picture, those are actually fuses that go across the busing from the line to the load side, as we take a look at that. That configuration of the cabinet was indeed the challenge of how do we, the broad question from the plant manager or facility manager at the time is, how do I open the door and do inspection when it's 119 calories? Well, the result on that is we probably don't want people in that cabinet unless we can be absolutely assured that we are in that electrically safe work condition as defined by the 70E standards. So how do we do that in this particular application, in this particular piece of equipment? With using the devices such as what we can bring to the table with the absence of voltage testing devices.
Okay, so give me 1 second. I want to just look at some of the other things that you've done in this specific instance, where you talk about the 70E risk control hierarchy and hazard identification, right? So what type of elements that you have used, and can you just talk through this risk control hierarchy elements? So how do you rack and stack those different types of controls as they apply to the context of discussion, and what type of things that you evaluated to bring that safety to enhance the workers' safe being? So.
Yeah, well, again, 70E throughout the process has been our guide, I guess, when we want to describe it that way. So today, when we looked at ultimately what are the metrics in 70E, once we know we have this cabinet of 119 calories, and once we know that the customer wants to be able to access that in terms of maintenance and inspections and things like that, how do we get there? So 70E gives us the guidelines that under Article 105.4, hazard elimination shall be the first priority. And then in the 2018 standard, what's new is really the representation of the chart that you see on your screen that outlines the standards of the risk assessment protocols on those. So as we look through to talk about these, the most highest level of that is elimination. And indeed, with this particular solution, we've eliminated the exposure to the worker because we brought in the absence of voltage devices. So as we go down through these different methodologies, the amount of human interaction on these becomes greater. So as we go down through the hierarchy here, we get less and less control that requires more and more correct interaction from the human side in order to be able to handle that level of risk assessment and risk control. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about this risk control hierarchy and the control methods, additional point that comes into discussion is the qualification of worker, right? So you need to take two things into consideration. One is the worker qualification as it applies to the task, and the second one is the installation conditions or the environment of where it's being applied to. So I mean, risk control hierarchy gives you the different control measures to pick and choose from. However, you need to also take into consideration the type of qualification your workers have, and also what kind of human error is possible given that scenario. Do you agree with that?
Right. And again, one of the results or benefits that we have as we implemented this solution is now the true testing still is in the hands of that qualified individual, but it's brought to the front door of the cabinet with the installation of the voltage test system.
Okay, that's pretty good. And also, how many electricians or qualified electrical workers are at Torrance?
Well, they have a maintenance crew, and again, the maintenance crew itself in typical industrial facilities do not necessarily have the years and years deep background as certified or licensed electricians. So when we take that hard look at what is a qualified individual under the 70E standard, in broad sense, we have an individual that by definition of their job, they may come in contact with live energized parts. So an individual that has that responsibility is where we start. And then if we study the rest of Article 110.2 of the qualified individual requirements, we really have a block of skills or proficiencies that really, no matter what the worker does in terms of his scope of doing or having access to energized components and working through that process of de-energized and maintenance and the things that they do, there's still that body of those skill sets required on site. And at the end of the day, management of the facility is going to ask folks to be oriented to very specific tasks to demonstrate proficiency on those tasks, and management ultimately will deem them to be qualified and, I'll say, checked out or deemed proficient to be able to manage different aspects of working with their electrical equipment within their particular facility. So you might have a low-level startup first-year maintenance tech that is responsible for maintaining lighting and learns all the ins and outs of properly de-energizing a lighting fixture and doing the servicing there, all the way up to the individuals that are going to enter this 119-calorie cabinet that's the critical piece of equipment. Very different levels of individuals as we do those. And this painting of these individuals and the requirements, it's really one of the key functions of developing the electrical safety plan for a customer, and then ultimately understanding your equipment, the lay of the land of what is your arc flash exposure, and many times developing I'm going to call it a policy of practice of who gets into what, and not necessarily that everybody gets into all the equipment in the building. In fact, many companies will define that safety plan that the largest switchgear and distribution with very high levels of incident energy, should they have a need for that service in those areas, that's where they bring in their licensed electrician contractors who have the larger skills to that versus relying on internal individuals. And all that really is laid out as being understanding your equipment, understanding your people, your tasking, your training, and applying those all together in terms of a risk assessment and portfolio. Yep.
Yeah. So, and also before we both connected 4 weeks ago, you also mentioned that you are evaluating a few other technologies as it applies to this specific task of absence of voltage testing. Do you want to explain on this? Just kind of put the other product, what we're evaluating. You want to just talk about what some of the considerations were?
I was taking a hard look and met the folks from the Panduit product line at a trade show of late as we were evaluating this same type of result on it. And then I had a chance to listen in on your webinar as well. And one of the key metrics as we looked at this is that, the Panduit product really provides what I call an automated whole test sequence, top to bottom, takes the qualified individual really out of the exercise, and at the end of the test sequence within their particular device gives them a green light to move forward from there. So as we evaluated that, first of all, the device itself as installed is a more complex installation than what we look at it with the voltage test station from Grace here. So there's a requirement that they actually install 2 terminations or 2 leads with some distance apart on each phase. As one piece of it. And there's actually an extra whole nother module that there's a module that obviously gets installed in the door that then on the Panduit product line goes to an internal control type box. And then from the control type box, it goes out to what I'll call the different points of monitoring or sensing as you would terminate a sensor wire type of stuff. 2 other big requirements on this one is, as we really studied the specifications, we have a category 4 rated at that 575 volt application here as what that furnace is on the shop floor. And in the case of the rated values of the specifications, the Panduit product did not qualify to be useful or used in that one. It was outside of their specifications on that. And then one of the other pieces that really attracted us to the Grace product line was the voltage indicator side of that. So as we look at the voltage indicator, ultimately our solution is going to have 2 of them in place. One of them is going to be on the in conjunction with the part of the voltage test system itself, where we have both the testing ports and our voltage indicator within that same module. And then the other device is actually to be monitoring the line side of all of that. And one of the safety factors we looked at, Pranay, if you can bring back up the internal cabinet of the furnace, there would be a good show here on this one. As we take a look at that, all of this line side busing is in the foreground of the cabinet. So from a worker perspective, if you open up this cabinet door and you're making a assessment that that line side busing is indeed de-energized, it's the first thing that greets you as you go into the particular design of this cabinet. So to be absolutely sure that we had zero energy on the line side, one of the concerns the plant manager brought up is for some unlikely reason, we lose all of the fuses at the same time. And then we're testing with the voltage test system on the other side. And we did not notice that the voltage indicator was already telling us that that we lost power there. We still could see voltage on that line side. So the combination of a device before and after the fusing gave us the indicators to be the right solution as we put those two devices together within this very unique cabinet.
Oh, okay. So I think you mentioned about a few things here. Let me just. These are, as I'm showing on the screen, I think these are some of the considerations, right? You mentioned like the Cat 4, the rating requirement for a 575 volts.
Yes.
The reason you asked about. And then there was also a discussion, if I recall my memory, there was a point about the installation being old and you can't bring the voltage threshold to 1.3 or 3 volts. Is that something that you want to expand upon? I kind of forgot. I forgot the notes on that. So do you guys have that 3 volts threshold or 1.3 volts threshold as it would require for the automated test device to perform to verify the absence of voltage? Do you have any comments on that, or have you guys looked at it? Or?
I was trying to remember the details on that myself as well. I figured I'd leave that one for you on that.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is I'm sure that you mentioned this facility is 147 years old and there is like the stray voltage on your existing bus which is coming, which could probably hinder with the device performance itself if they can't verify with 1.3 or 1.3 volts is what it was mentioned at point of time. So yeah, I think category 4 is the one thing, and then you talked about the installation difficulties with having 8 leads connected because of the foreground of where the line side sits, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So tell me this. This is something I'm going to put you on spot. So when it comes to safety, is safety an absolute zero risk in your view?
Well, I think there's always some element of risk when working with the electrical system, but the key is the skills of the qualified individual. So that as they carefully move through the practices and the safety protocols that are taught and understood. The whole goal of what we do at 70E is to help individuals understand the management of the electrical system within their buildings. Electrical systems are risky. I mean, the electrical power, especially when you look at the amount of power off of this particular application with the medium voltage transformer and calculated to 119 calories of incident energy. How do you manage that risk within the building in order to maintain that piece of equipment? And so those are the challenges that our customers and our industry face. And in the role of what we do, providing the types of products and services we do here at ASG is to, number one, make known those hazards, but then work with them again with the guidelines of 70E to ultimately say, what is our practices and policies to do the best we can to mitigate that risk? I don't think we ever get to zero because there's always something that can happen along the way on that.
Yeah. I mean, to add to your point, again, I think that's the primary reason why Article 120.5 calls it in the title of that article itself as a process of verifying and establishing a de-energized state, because they don't tell it as a product-oriented approach. It goes through steps 1 through step 7, and they recommend all these steps has to be performed in the sequence it's presented, if possible, right? So, and then they talk about the exceptions and what these things are. So the point I'm trying to make is, I think it's more like a process-oriented approach. And then when you try to tie in your risk control hierarchy and your control measures in place, you try to look through your installation conditions, you look at your worker qualifications in defining what those risk controls that are specifically suitable for your application and then derive at a end solution. Is that true?
Yes, in fact, the Article 110.2, as you begin that discussion of electrical safety training for the qualified individual, there's basically some language in there that says that, the amount of training needed is shall coincide with the amount of risk and risk exposure. And again, we created that early dialogue of less training is required to service just light fixtures versus this industrial control furnace cabinet. So when you look at those levels of different training on that, 70E speaks to exactly that. You need to provide training that is appropriate for the risk that the individual may face as they execute the job responsibilities that the management's asking them to include in their duties.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm going to show you, you decided, as you mentioned, you guys chose to go for grace voltage test station on your load side for absence of voltage verification, correct? And
Yep.
then what I'm showing on the screen is the voltage indicator. That's what the blue color faceplate, that is purely for alerting on a voltage presence to just make sure the qualified worker or a task qualified technician outside the cabinet knows that there is the voltage or hazardous energy that's present on the line side as well, correct?
Right. So and the other advantage of the voltage indicator is that if they, it really will display what I refer to as an always-on available voltage. So if for some reason they actually lose an entire phase, they could actually see that as a condition right off of the voltage indicator on the display of the control cabinet with this installed. And again, when we looked at assessing how Panduit presented its product on that, we don't really have this always-on indicator of voltage or an immediate absence of that. At the end of it, it gives us a green light that says go and open the cabinet, and without the opportunity to intervene with a qualified individual test directly on the test ports on the voltage test system. But then again, the additional safety protocol of what is my line side of this cabinet doing? What's that status? That voltage indicator on that side will indeed be able to show us that voltage has been removed from the line side of the enclosure as well.
Okay, that's pretty good. The reason why I try to show this risk control hierarchy is because you mentioned the point. There's going to be some amount of residual risk that's going to exist, whatever type of control measure or mechanism you put in place. And it's up to that facility to make that determination and what is that acceptable level, correct? So kind of going back to your comment on the worker qualification and also types of using different things, not just they're going to give you an absolute zero safety, right?
Exactly.
It's more like giving you the different levels or the layers within that risk control hierarchy so that the qualified person or a task qualified person can safely understand what is going on with the cabinet and then make a determination to the defect.
Right. In fact, part of our overall qualified individual training program is we will take the individuals through pretty much what I'll refer to as a standard 4-hour, I'm going to call it classroom version of arc flash orientation. What's an arc flash? What are the 70E standards related to it? How to read a label? How to understand your personal protection equipment? And I'll call it the class lectures on running an energized work session. What makes our training unique, though, is we actually have a second body of training that's ultimately kind of a review and transition session of, okay, here's what you learned in the classroom related to arc flash and the general discussion of work practices. And here's a little more discussions of specific pieces of equipment within your facility. And then the very last segment of that is our trainer, who's also a CESCP level credential with the NFPA standard, will take and work with those individuals on a one-on-one assessment, because the 70E standard under qualified individual ultimately describes it in terms of the worker shall demonstrate proficiency as we look at key safety protocols and tasks. So when we look at how we build out a qualified individual for a company and provide them the right training, First, we need to assess that training. Is it the right level of training for the right level of exposure or risk to make sure they get enough levels of training? But at the end of the day, the training says it shall be both classroom and on the job, and there shall be discussion of ultimately allowing the individual to demonstrate their personal proficiency on, frankly, the safe work practices that we're trying to build and put in place.
That's good. So, and also as I was looking back at my notes, we also had a few discussion points about you had some concerns about bringing the voltage to the door with our devices compared to other products. And then I kind of made some explanation. Do you agree with that? And because a lot of customers like you, when they come to use our products, they ask this question: am I bringing hazardous voltage to the door? Because these are mounted on the door, right? So and then we talked about the UL 61010 requirements on bringing the non-hazardous live voltage, because there is impedance protected built into the device, and these devices are rated to be mounted outside the door, right?
Right. And so as they're mounted outside the door, again, we can use a qualified individual still using his test meters to do an active test, if you want to call it that. But it's much, much safer because the device itself is part of what's both giving the worker access to assessing voltage, but also doing it in a protected environment because that's what the device delivers.
Right. Yeah. And what kind of installation considerations you are taking while installing these devices? Because you're bringing the voltage to the door, I'm sure this cabinets will have some sharp edges, and also it will have the door pinches and stuff when you're looking through this. Are you taking any considerations or looking at anything to avoid that, to minimize the damage or protect these conductors from the damage?
Well, the actual hands-on installation was something I was particularly concerned about throughout all of this evaluation, and really relied on Grace and the engineering as we looked inside this cabinet and said, okay, how do we install this product? Where does it work? How are we going to successfully work with it? And what's the specifications? And we even got down into these discussions of, okay, well, this device connects up with 18 gauge wire. And I wasn't sure in the early discussion whether the wires came with the device or whether or not I had to supply those and then figure out all of that type of casing and busing and things like that. Yeah. In the end, it does make sense to secure the wires within some type of housing, if you want to call it that, a sheathing of some type on that. And indeed, we worked through all of those issues. And one of the other interesting parts of trying to land these various terminations was, would the size of the lug reduce the gapping distance between those different levels of busing and be able to more easily trigger an arc flash event to start, because we've closed the gap between the original engineering busing on those. So when you look at the distances of those bus plates, you certainly wouldn't want to put two lug assemblies back to back and really close that gap with, by taking a third of that distance away. So we really spent a lot of time to say, where are we going to land our sensor wires in terms of usage and terminations and how those would work. And again, one of the good things about the Grace offering compared to the other ones we looked at is you only have half the wires, because the other one requires 2 wires per phase versus 1 wire per phase.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And then I also told our marketing department to just make sure they show these leads on back end of the device, so that, like the question you asked me, you thought this devices doesn't come with any kind of a wire.
No, I thought it just had terminals on the back, and we grabbed a spool of 18 gauge wire and went at it from there as the first mindset. But indeed, the device does come with leads. I believe it's up to an 8-foot lead, and if for some reason you need more than that, the installation instructions were to land what do they call those? A little termination block. And the wires from the product goes to the termination block, out of the termination block, again, now with your own wiring, for whatever reason you're beyond that 8 feet, and then get out to your points of sensor as you would, install the different devices or terminations right onto where you're going to take your measurement.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you this question because I think you will be able to answer this much better than I'm sure. So, last couple of days we did other webinar, and there was a guy who asked, what is this CESCP, that Certified Electrical Safety Compliance Professional, and what it has to do with that credential and such. Do you want to elaborate on what the process is like, Chuck? Because I know that I'm also a CESCP, but I would like to hear it from your own words. So.
All right. Well, the CESCP and some of the other certified electrical safety programs offered by the NFPA. So first of all, it's specifically an NFPA credential on the 70E standard. The CESCP is their highest level of a credential against the 70E standard, and it basically is in place for those who do what we do, which was design and implement the electrical safety programs and work with individuals to go do that. The standard was actually launched in about November of 2014, and we embraced it fairly early. And myself and one of my leads at the time jointly took our exams and qualified in about May of 2014 on that. And ultimately, it's demonstrating lots of hours of training. I think there's about 40 hours of training of various things related to electrical safety that you then apply to the NFPA credentialing resources and asked to be a candidate for the exam. And then once you're a candidate for the exam, if you want to hold up your book there again, Benet, that you had there that was in your hand, you need to then be a study and do the expert of that. And then you need to go take a proctored exam. And once you pass the exam, you're then a certified electrical safety compliance professional, but then you've got a 3-year track of promoting and working with the standard that you need to show certain levels of activity to then recertify over a 3-year period. Yeah. So 2014 was then 2017. I'm already certified through the 2023 timeframe, and frankly, I've accompanied enough points there that if I had to recertify today, I'd be out to 2026. But we'll wait for 70E to come and give us the 2021 edition first.
So is it fair enough to say that if you are a CESCP, you kind of live and breathe this NFPA 70E, and if you wake up in the middle of your sleep, probably you know what this Article 130.2 or 110.2 and everything, and be able to... We
do know the standard pretty well on that if folks start a discussion on a particular topic, we can pretty much drill down to that specific section. I can't always quote it from memory, but I can find it very quickly as we work through the various pieces of the chapter. In our ARC Flash overview class, to give our individuals and those that are receiving our instruction kind of a bit of an ongoing history lesson, we really have a section that takes them through the 70E standard from the very first emphasis of 2009 with the device-specific labels to then the layers of requirements that have been added. So we know that 70E is an ongoing development of an electrical safety standard, that what we're doing back in 2009 and before are still very different issues than what we do today along the way on that. One of the articles I wrote for ECNM magazine in February talked about what I refer to as the evolution of the ARC Flash study. So the article speaks to the reference that folks that did a ARC Flash study many years ago and are now faced with the standard of 70E saying your 5 years are up, thou shalt renew it. And then they're scratching their heads that they haven't looked at it for all those years in the middle. Now what is really the scenario on many of them. And the first assessment of that is those companies treated it as a project instead of a process. So when we look at electrical safety overall in your building, it's a process. You have new employees, you have changes to your electrical system, and even this year, of course, we have changes that the 70E standard itself will launch in fall of this year, the 2021 edition. So we're going to see new and different requirements. Yeah, and there's been some major changes to that. And again, we did touch on that, for example, that the 2015 standard was the one that really brought into the discussions and outlined in much of its structure additional requirements related to what are we doing to maintain the electrical equipment. And we want to maintain it. Why? Because well-maintained equipment reduces the risk of the potential launch or triggering of the arc flash event itself. So I was happy to see that, because even before 2015, given that we were an electrical testing company to start with, that's how we built our project methodology. We inventoried the electrical system, then we tested it with the health check, and then we had all that data available to really do a couple things. One is, of course, build out the engineering study on top of it with really good data with no assumptions. And I've read some arc flash study reports with some pretty nasty assumptions in that. Basically, if you read the assumption and then translate it to the facility manager sitting across the desk, and I go, what this says to me is that the engineer didn't really look at anything in your building, but the way he filled out his arc flash engineering software is he used this assumption. So that basically says you, as the facility manager, needs to abide by that assumption in your equipment in order to make the values he put in his report make sense.
So it's more like a garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. As we look at, and that's really one of the whole things about how some studies were done in the past in terms of what I'll call general nameplate data gathering versus the deep dive into the electrical components themselves. And again, you can look at many of those old studies and see what was done in the name of assumptions, and find some real skeletons in the closet.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you want to just, we're about 48 minutes into this conversation, Chuck. So if you want to just give our viewers 3 pieces of advice from an electrical safety standpoint, if you want to take your experience and give our audience or viewers, whoever is watching this, what would that 3 pieces of advice would be to our viewers?
Well, I guess number 1 would be understand the real good elements of an arc flash study, an arc flash risk assessment. What really needs to go into that? And ultimately, it is building out the engineering analysis with no assumptions. You know, where you rid it from the assumptions, where you're documenting the electrical system with the certainties of devices, such as, are you using the right fuses, as an example? I mean, we've opened up cabinets, for example, and if you didn't open up the cabinet, you would go, oh, that's a 60 amp disconnect, and I'm going to say it's a 60 amp disconnect, and I know they're going to use this make and model of a fuse, and that's what I'm going to push into my engineering software. Only to open it up, and what you see is that, well, the installing HVAC contractor of the day didn't have fuses, so he put in 2 copper pipes.
Yeah.
And so obviously that changes the entire metric, that we don't have a overcurrent protection at that point in that. The other one is, what are you doing to maintain your electrical system over time in terms of de-energized testing, ongoing maintenance? Ultimately, the core of the 2015 standards basically said, what are you doing to manage your equipment to reduce that risk of the hazard on that? And then the other piece, of course, is the electrical safety training of, take care of your employees. Those would probably be the biggest tips of that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's
amazing.
amazing.
Go another 45 minutes on that topic.
It's amazing. Like when you go and talk to some facilities and the managers, they're like, we have this in place because it's a compliance requirement, right? So that's what I was trying to open up the conversation when we started this. Most companies who use this type of devices, they're not there to just put a check box. They're there to really protect their employees. I'm really glad that Torrance has chosen our product, and we're really glad that they're using this as a solution to protect their safety of their employees. So really, it's an amazing thing.
Well, I agree on that. And in my years of working within this niche as an electrical contractor, with everything we do on the 70E standard on that, we've brought all those pieces in-house over the years. So we literally are that start to finish on that. And as you go out and work with customers on that, it's amazing the opinions that are out there on what should be the scope. I recently had a sales dialogue where the senior manager is looking at a $75,000 quote and a much larger quote from us, because we included these metrics of condition of maintenance. And the representative of the lower cost solution ultimately was sharing with our customer that you don't need that stuff. And I'm going, well, wait a minute. Let's look at the 70E standard as the guideline. And if you don't need that stuff, why does the scope or mission statement said your electrical safety program shall include safety-related maintenance? Article 110.1C says your electrical safety program shall include elements of condition of maintenance. So those guidelines are already there, but yet the interpretation of what goes into the arc flash study. In the purest sense, it's simply that engineering model that kicks out the labels and a bunch of tables and results. But again, the real key is the garbage in, garbage out to that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much, Chuck. Again, thank you for joining this conversation this morning and talking about our absence of voltage testing product. We really appreciate all your time. And then if you, all of viewers, if you are interested to hire ASG Electric Services from Chuck Fox, please reach out to Chuck directly, and Chuck can be reached at asgelectricwi.com. We're really happy that you're doing this for us, and yeah, let us know.
It's a pleasure to be with you today to go through this. And again, for those that are considering taking a look at these product lines, Vinay and his staff did an excellent job of what I'll call engineering support and helping us make sure that this was the absolute right fit for the application. So really nice support and good dialogue with both Vinay and his inside sales guy, Chris. So nice work on that side where you can proceed with confidence that these products and what's behind it is well supported.
Thank you, Chuck. We have like a couple of more minutes. I'll just see if there is any questions from Nick. I don't see anything coming in, but this will be available on LinkedIn, Facebook, and also YouTube channel of Grace. And also this will be posted on Chuck's LinkedIn page as well. So if you're watching this session, just feel free to share with your network and have them look at it. So yeah.
Well, this was a lot of fun. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have a discussion around the maintenance topic when it comes to electrical systems, because as you conclude this topic with maintenance condition off as being one of those major areas where people really don't pay attention to, I think that would be a great topic for discussion next time, to just get some of your inputs on maintenance related things, because equipment maintenance is going to play a significant role even before a worker is going to get in front of that equipment, right? So there's going to be that hazard that's going to be existent with that equipment, which needs to be maintained to protect the safety of that employee or the worker. So we should definitely schedule some time and discuss about it, Chuck, okay?
It's an interesting new topic. We'll look forward to it.
Thank you so much again, okay? Thank you, Chuck.
All righty. Goodbye now.
Bye. Are you there, Chuck?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'm ending the broadcast.